And you're live with the Monday edition of Nightline with myself, Tembekile Mkhotodo, still talking about, not stalking, about the election of John Steenhuisen as the DA's interim leader. That happening over the past 24 hours or so on Sunday at a federal council meeting here in Johannesburg. Helping us to talk about what this means for the DA going forward is the IIR's Herman Pretorius, as well as political analyst Prince Mashele. Gentlemen, we were talking about the very race element in the story. And interesting, Herman, you were making the point that, from the polling that you were citing, majority of South Africans don't care, for example, if the person who teaches their child is white, what is the racial makeup is for any of the national sport teams and such. But when you look at data out from just last week, you look at income data in this country, the reality is white South Africans such as you are still earning more, still appointed to higher positions, and that then translates to where people are able to stay, what people are able to eat, what other options are available for them, even at an education level. And that, you cannot deny, then colours their political association.
Yes, of course. No one is denying that race is important. I think Ms. Mashele might not have exactly picked up on what I said. I never said race isn't important, and I don't think John Steenhuisen ever said race isn't important. The fact is, race is at the core of our problems. It can't be at the core of our solutions. If Mr. Mashele is going to say during apartheid, whites benefited thus and thus and thus and thus, and he's saying now it's the black man's turn, then I don't think we've made any progress at all in terms of human rights. Then it's just a bigger group oppressing a smaller group, and I'm not in favor of any form of racial oppression. Let's get to the point of saying that even in today, 2019, 25 years after the ANC came to power, we still have this vast inequality between white people and black people. Why is that? Let's compare John Steenhuisen to Cyril Ramaphosa. John Steenhuisen, a white man who couldn't afford to finish his university degree. Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, a multi-billionaire. Now, where has Mr. Steenhuisen's race compensated for Mr. Ramaphosa's billions? Of course, race isn't something to be ignored. It is at the core of our problems. But exactly because it caused our problems, it can't be the core of our solutions. South Africa.
I want to come in on your Ramaphosa and Steenhuisen example and say that surely is the exception, not the rule.
Oh, yes.
Because the majority of black South Africans aren't living Ramaphosa's quality of life.
I'm not saying that's the rule. I'm not saying
that's a bad example.
But no, it's not a bad example. It's an applicable example. Because if you're going to say that non-racialism is somehow informed by whites, then Mr. Mashele is just clearly not familiar with the Institute of Race Relations' work going back to 1929 or 1947. When the Institute of Race Relations called for the repeal of the pass laws, or when we pressured the National Party into abandoning apartheid, or when we worked with the PAC, or when we worked with AZAPO, or when we criticized the DA, or when we criticized the ANC and the EFF. It's quite easy to to propound racism from the heights of the punditry, but walk amongst ordinary South Africans, and they don't care whether the policeman helping them is black or white. They want a good policeman.
Prince, is it not lazy and an exaggeration to brand the IIR and others who see the good in the DA as pro-white, anti-black, even racist?
Well, it is actually quite rich coming from a white man himself. I mean, if you look at the Institute of Race Relations, by the way, just look at it. You will see that it's a white institution. So a guy like me wouldn't be accommodated in that institute.
Nonsense. I mean,
that's number one.
That's
number
just
two.
Libel.
Let's keep
Would you please learn to listen?
Only if you speak legally true facts.
So I don't deserve to be.
You address me. Let's pretend. Okay, you're both in the principal's office. We're solving this issue between you. Address me, Prince.
All right. Okay. Here's the thing. Number one, and forget the Institute of Race Relations, because the Institute of Race Relations is just a Mickey Mouse little institute on the margins. What is important here is the reality of South Africans that is lived by South Africans, not what this gentleman thinks wherever he works. Here is the reality. If you went around South Africa and you see shacks, informal settlements, you would be mad to think that a white person would come out of those shacks. The face of poverty in South Africa is black. Now, to assume that in politics you don't need to have black leadership who understand the lived experience of black people, it's really to live in the world of ideology. Now, if you look at the DA where it is now, you can see that the white people have decided to take back their party, right? Now, Any black person who lives in poverty in Khayelitsha, in Langa, in Gugulethu, looking at the DA the way it is today, they cannot be inspired that those people who lead the DA understand the lived reality of black people, because they have never lived like black people. So this idea that you can have these white messiahs who congregate somewhere and have their own political parties and tell us that black people don't mind to be taught by a white teacher, it's complete nonsense. Actually, it's insulting to black people. And it is about time that we must tell them the truth, that we are not some dum-dums who must be told from wherever they are sitting that they will tell us that we don't care about the color of a person who lives outside. We care.
That's absurd.
That's why in the liberation struggle, that's why in the liberation struggle, by the way, it mattered that Mandela was a black leader. Right?
Okay, let me ask you this then, Herman.
Can I just
you will respond to this and my question, yes. I will allow you, but allow me to take back the reins. It is my platform. You'll respond to Prince in a moment, but I also want you to, in responding to that, to speak to how the DA, which hopes to take over government nationally, would be able to speak to a black majority, a poor majority in this country, with a leadership that perhaps is not familiar with the lived experience beyond the research and polling that you were quoting, versus perhaps the ANC and maybe even EFF, that has leaders who are entrenched in those communities and come from those very people.
Okay, so clearly, apparently the polling industry has no integrity or standing here, which is awkward for political analysis, but let's go beyond that. Can Mr. Mashele tell me how many black people voted for the DA in 2019? About 580,000. That's more people that voted, black people, that voted for the DA than voted for Good, for COPE, for the ACDP, for the UDM. Are those parties even more white than the DA? Must be, because, I mean, fewer black voters voted for them. You would pick up from what Mr. Mashele is saying, not a single fact, not a single data point, narrative, opinion, critical race theory without any engagement with the reality that South Africans are common sense, decent people. When I was quoting the statistic, Mr. Mashele, about that white teacher, I wasn't quoting it about a white teacher. I was saying white South Africans, black South Africans, Indian South Africans, coloured South Africans, they don't care what the skin colour of their child's teacher is, as long as that teacher is good. I'm sorry, but I, a white man, if I had a child, I would prefer a good black teacher compared to a bad white teacher. That's common sense. It's common decency. And to say anything else would be just continuation of narrative. Some facts, some data,
you are pushing rhetoric, opinion with no data. Where are your facts?
Well, my facts are South African reality. And here are the facts, which you will never deny. Black people in South Africa, in their majority, have been voting for the ANC.
Absolutely.
White people, in their majority, have been voting for white parties, the DA. Now, tell me where is opinion on that. You can't deny that.
No,
but let's park that. Could you please listen?
Could you please speak true?
Okay, you said I address you. I'll ignore you for now.
I need to walk off and give you guys a moment.
When he speaks, I listen.
Okay,
when I speak,
continue.
Exactly. So I've given him the facts about the South African reality. Number two, the overwhelming majority of poor people in South Africa are black. Now, if you think that's my opinion, that I'm manufacturing it, I don't know where he lives. Number four, the color of the person who leads a political party does matter in the South African political context.
Okay.
That is not an opinion. Now, if you tomorrow woke up and gave us someone who looks like him and say that person must be the president of South Africa. By the way, if you were to go to the UK, if you were to go to Germany, and you try to do that and give them a black man and say this is your president, most probably those societies would actually reject that.
Prince and Herman, you could both have this conversation for hours on end, and I'm sure we'll have you on a lot more often here on Nightline. But for now, let's park it there. My thanks to you both for coming in. And that has been our discussion there with the Democratic Alliance, or examining at least the latest developments coming out of the Democratic Alliance. I'm told, in fact, that we're going to continue our discussions. That's what we're going to do. Stay with Nightline.